More of my conversation with Danny Evans from the Sporting Tribune on this episode of Locked On Anaheim Ducks.
You're Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Anaheim Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Anaheim Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jason JD Hernandez, and this episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So I've been covering minor league hockey for over a decade, contributor to Defend the Nest, and also the PA voice for the Coachella Valley Firebirds. And we've still got a whole half of a conversation that we're going to get to in a short bit. Once again, thanks to Danny Evans from the Sporting Tribune for joining on this latest podcast. So we talked about the jersey leak from the last episode. And since recording, there was further leaks showing the whole jersey and the whole uniform, which is pretty much all orange. So we've talked about OC Vibe. We began to talk about the first round draft pick on the previous podcast. On this one, we're going to focus a little bit more on the latter round draft picks and some other odds and ends that we're going to get to on this podcast. So that's what is coming up. Also coming up on this podcast, as you may have seen, we just did a podcast, or I did one, about the anatomy of a rebuild. So please check that one out. The next episode that will be recorded is going to be a mailbag episode that's going to be recorded live at Acrisure Arena. So that'll be an upcoming episode about that. And then we will close out the week. So a lot to get to coming up on Locked On Anaheim Ducks. In the meantime, without much further ado, here is part 2 of my conversation with the one and only Danny Evans. Please enjoy. Given that they're already sitting at 35 anyway, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you want to back that up to making the playoffs next season and trying to compete for a playoff spot no matter what. Then yes, there's such a thing as like being passive and laying back, but it's been so long now, and the pieces are just about there. Like the young guys, it feels like they are ready to break out next season. Even though we only saw it in spurts this past season, they're right there. As long as everyone remains healthy. If Trevor Zegras can remain healthy for an entire season, and I know there's 1.5 million rumors and articles that Zegras is for sure going to get traded, which I don't even listen to at this point, by the way.
Smart.
And people say, oh, he's going to get traded for sure because he had a down year. He had a down year because he was injured, folks.
Right. He broke his ankle. That's not a minor injury. He didn't play. He didn't play last season, hardly at all. And, like you said, Trevor Zegras trade rumors are as prevalent as oxygen outside. I mean, it's who he is. He's a trade rumor on skates. And, I will say, I feel like some of the trade rumors from this cycle have been a little bit more, God, I don't even know what word to choose. Intensity, and people are not just attaching him to trade rumors, but they're attaching the reasoning why they think Verbeek wants to trade him, because he's not a Verbeek type player. He's not 6'2". All these different reasons why they think Verbeek should trade Zegras. And I haven't heard a hockey reason. I haven't heard anybody say there's a better player that we can get for Trevor Zegras, and that's why we're trading him. That's never been the rumor. It's always just been wild speculation and clickbait. So until we hear, a rumor with some legs, I think it's safe to chalk it up as just people flapping their gums.
Are you saying that there's more vitriol to these rumors nowadays? Because that's what it kind of reads as, right?
It does. It's a personal thing with Zegras. People really dislike him personally, but why? Like, I get, some people don't like his attitude. Some people think he's a little bit flashy. We've all heard the John Tortorella commentary about Zegras, which is just gibberish. And there is vitriol. I mean, it's you can't deny it. People people feel very strongly about Trevor Zegras and have a lot of negative things to say. However, when their team is involved in a trade rumor, they pounce and they love it and they want him. So which is it? Pick a lane.
I was just going to say, pick a side, guys.
Right.
Do you want him or do you not want him? Do you hate him or do you love him? I mean, I love him on the Ducks. I think we all forget Trevor Zegras led the team in scoring the previous season, 22-23. He led the team.
Right.
And they had some good spurts there, if not for a slew of unfortunate injuries and just unfortunate events that happened that season. And I don't put that on Trevor Zegras at all.
No.
Not one bit.
No, and like you were saying earlier, Jason, like they have so much young talent on this team, and one thing young talent needs is veteran leadership. Trevor Zegras is 23, but he is a veteran in this league, and that's an essential component of a winning hockey team, is having people who can show the younger players how it's done. And maybe Zegras's career has been hamstrung by injuries a little bit. And, maybe he hasn't risen to the level of some of the people he was drafted near, because they play on significantly better teams than he does. But, I think people who are in a rush to trade Trevor Zegras are missing the fact that he is an essential part of this team. Losing him would really hurt this team. And, unless they got back a player in return who was, significantly better, which I haven't heard a rumor like that yet.
Let's be realistic here. The Ducks are not going to get anyone of that kind of value back for Trevor Zegras, because there's the perception that the Ducks are going to be selling or they're going to be desperate. No, they're not going to get someone better than Trevor Zegras in a realistic trade environment. Right. So you don't get rid of him at all.
I wouldn't be completely shocked if you were traded, just because we're so conditioned to these rumors that, the concept has been in our minds for years.
Right.
But the actual impact of Trevor Zegras being traded away would be so far beyond just on the ice. I mean, he sells T-shirts. He puts butts in the seats. He is a moneymaker for this team.
He sells shoes.
And a merch mover. And why would a team that wants to be lucrative jettison a player like that?
Especially when you're a team that's trying to be, for lack of better terms, they're trying to be relevant in this league, where right now the Ducks are getting maybe one national TV game a season, as they did last season. They're losing that money. They're losing that national TV revenue. They're losing in so many ways, and they've got to win, but they've also got to keep those players that are going to get eyes on the TV or butts in the seats, as you mentioned. So
agreed. I do believe, however, Zegras needs to produce next season. He needs to put the puck in the net on a regular basis, because that's what he's here for. It's cool that he's really creative and has created some incredible, dazzling goals for this team, but we're looking at volume now. We're looking at winning games, and that means putting the puck in the net.
Yeah, I think
did not do last year.
As someone else on the network says, we can't have a trick shot merchant leading the way every season.
Right. It's time for the rubber to meet the road and, justify the high draft pick that he was.
We'll have more with Danny Evans after this brief first intermission. Stay locked in. And now a brief word from FanDuel, and it is summertime, and that means baseball and so much more. And you can bet it all on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's also the Stanley Cup Finals. So what are you waiting for? That's $200 you can use to bet everything from the final MVP to who's going to hit one out of the park. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel is America's number one sportsbook and the official sports betting partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. And please, folks, gamble responsibly. Since we're on the topic of bright spots, I do want to talk about this amount of money that the Ducks have. They've gotten rid of some contracts, and they also got some players to Edmonton. Sam Carrick is gone. Adam Henrique is gone. So all that contract money is now gone. They have the money to spend. Are there any free agents that you've been looking at that the Ducks could potentially pick up?
You know, I've been waiting for the draft to be complete before I start turning my attention to free agency. I think I call it a vibe, but like you said earlier, like I think the draft is going to be eventful for the Anaheim Ducks.
Love the choice of words.
So free agency is something that I've kind of placed on the back burner for now. I will say that there are a lot of Ducks restricted free agents, and I'm curious to see, who amongst that group is chosen to stay. I don't know who that will be. You can make an argument for some players, but I really don't know. I think if there are draft day trades, those frequently can involve players coming back, and that will have an impact on the decisions that are made in free agency as well. So there's just too many balls in the air right now to really think, okay, here's who Verbeek should pursue in free agency. Would you agree with that?
I will agree with that 1,000%. And I'll actually bring that back with the question of the restricted free agents that are Ducks controlled right now. And I actually have the list right here. Bo Grew, Max Jones, Brett Leeson, Isaac Lundestrom, Jackson Lacombe, Gustav Lindstrom, Earl Vakanainen. Which of those guys do you think is most likely to come back, and who's likely to go?
That's really a really difficult question to answer because, as we've mentioned, this team is making a change, turning a corner.
Yeah.
I personally am a big Brett Leeson fan. I think for the amount of money that he makes, the job that he does, he's not an elite NHL player, but he does his job, and he's an intimidator out there. Mm-hmm. He'll contribute with a goal here and there, and he's mean, and that's a Verbeek player. So I would say if I had to choose one guy coming back, I think Leeson would be a guy. I think I loved the way Vakanainen played last year. I think he is evolving into a legit NHL D-man, and I'd like to see him stay. But then again, if they end up drafting Salayev or Lev Shanov or one of those guys, you'd have to think that Urho is probably on the chopping block. Right. I'm a big Isaac Lundestrom fan. I think his defense is a difference maker for this team. He might not contribute significantly offensively, and that could have a bearing on whether he stays or goes. But yeah, I mean, you could make arguments for and against a lot of those guys. It's really a mystery right now. Like that, and I think that's one thing that you just have to credit Verbeek for. Nobody has any idea what he's going to do. Anybody who claims that they do, I'd love to see the evidence, because I haven't seen it.
And I actually had those three guys top of my list as well. I had number one, Brett Leeson, as well. I love in the time that he's played that he's gotten the contributions when needed. He's had the big play when needed. If there's an important PK during certain parts of the game, and this was right around the trade when they were still okay on the PK, he was there to make some pretty big plays. And in the limited time that we saw Brett Leeson, he seemed like a player, not just a Pat Verbeek player, but a Greg Cronin player. And I only know this from watching several years with Cronin at the helm of the Colorado Eagles. He fits his style of play as well. So when you have someone that both the coach and the GM love, that's going to give you those dirty minutes. That's not afraid to get into the dirty areas. We love that. I mean, you need those lunch pail guys in the bottom six that are going to give you maybe not heavy minutes, but they'll give you impactful minutes. And I was very much enamored with his play when he was out there. So I would love the Ducks to keep Brett Leeson. And Vax I've liked in spurts. Like, he's had some really good moments with the Ducks. And Lundestrom, I would like to see stick around because there is the importance of having that bottom six guy. Like, certain teams need those guys that can be reliable on the fourth line. One of my favorite fourth liners that knows his role is Nick Dowd with the Washington Capitals. He's never going to make headlines, but he's consistently on the fourth line and will give you important minutes when needed. And I feel that's just as important to look at than a top 6 guy.
Agreed. However, one thing we can learn from watching these Stanley Cup finals is that the teams that are competing for the cup, their bottom 6 is significantly better than the Ducks was last year. And if Verbeek is serious about making a move and starting to compete, there's going to need to be an elevation of that bottom 6. And, while we enjoyed watching Leeson and all these other guys on the bottom 6, is that a competitive bottom 6? Maybe it worked for a team that was, near last place in the league, but if they're going to be legitimate competitors, it's going to need to be improved upon. And so, that's something we might see this offseason.
Just one more bit of business before we let you go.
Sure.
And because I like making these kind of predictions, what is your hope for this season as far as, do you realistically think that if they draft well, is this a team that could make the playoffs next season?
I want to answer this carefully because
so do I.
It's a prediction. I think that there are so many determining factors as to how this team performs next year. We watched some young players this past season struggle at times. And I think it's foolish to think that they're going to make an enormous leap in their skill sets between last year and next. They'll improve and they'll be working all summer and they'll be better. But are they yet to the point where, they can carry this team to the playoffs? I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, individually they play great, but have they learned to gel and play together? I know that Cutter Gauthier has, the play that he had on his line last year when he in the one game that he played.
Yeah.
There seemed to be some chemistry there, and we'll see if that continues. I would imagine there will be some line juggling based on the new personnel that comes in, and it's really hard to predict because, like I said, there are so many unanswered questions still. We're still really early in the off season. And, I personally believe that they will be better. I really do. I think another year playing together will help them improve, and they'll be a more dynamic team for sure. Whether or not they're able to fill the net more consecutively and consistently than they did last year will be, the determining factor.
Because I'm optimistic by nature, and at times it was trying to pull strings, trying to find some kind of positivity. I took a lot of positive notes out of that final game of the season. One, because of who they played and who they beat, but also because there was that chemistry, because we saw what Cutter Gauthier can do when he's full in with some very talented other players. That line, as you mentioned, they were buzzing the entire game. And maybe some of that has a little bit of adrenaline going, and I get that. But there was a lot of positives to take away from that final game that it actually left me with a little bit of hope. And it got me thinking, it's possible that they could at least compete into April of next season.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what I'm carefully going to say is I think they will compete for a playoff spot next season and still be competitive in April.
Yeah, I would love for that to be true. It would certainly make writing about this team really fun if they were competing for a playoff spot. There are just too many unanswered questions right now to predict. I think they'll be better. Like I said earlier, I don't think they'll be drafting in the top 3 next year. They'll definitely make a move. How high that move is remains to be seen, and it really does depend on these moves that Verbeek makes between now and the start of the season.
Yep. Before we let you go, where can the fine folks find your work, and where can they find you online?
Well, thank you for asking, Jason. My Twitter handle's on the screen. I cover the Ducks for the Sporting Tribune with Derek Lee, who you should be following on Twitter if you don't. He's an incredible beat writer for this team. And we will be providing team coverage next season. So the whole season will be will be ours. Where else can you find me? I have a book on Amazon that I wrote in 2009 called Rage Against the Meshuggah, which is a Yiddish word. I won't even bother trying to spell it for you, but if you just search Danny Evans on Amazon, you'll find it.
Yep. And on the audio side, the Twitter X account is Danny Evans TST. For those that want to follow him for the ride next season, which I hope will be a fun ride next season. I have confidence that it'll be at least a fun ride. Danny, great talking. You'll have to do this again, probably after free agency and after the draft.
That sounds great. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks for coming on.
Okay.
Once again, a very, very special thank you to Danny Evans, who took some time from his schedule to join the podcast. Once again, you can find Danny Evans and his work on the Sporting Tribune covering the Anaheim Ducks. His Twitter X, once again, is at Danny Evans TST. So go ahead and give him a follow. He's going to be covering the Ducks all season long. So throw him a follow if you have not already and check out his work. In the meantime, as I mentioned at the intro, next episode is going to be a mailbag. So make sure you get those questions in. Probably by the time this is uploaded, it'll be before recording. But if you haven't already, send in those questions. And you could always send in your mailbag questions to lockedonanaheimducks@gmail.com. Or you could leave a comment, or you could send me a message on Twitter X. My personal Twitter X is at StimpyJD. The show's Twitter X is at LO_Ducks. And once again, email, great way to send your mailbag questions. And I will get through as many of those as possible. So once again, I just want to thank you all for sending in your questions every time we do one of these. And got to give a couple shout outs here because I said I would. Shout out to Tom, who always gives some good mailbag questions. So Tom, special shout out to you, bud, for always giving good questions. And also, I'll throw in another random shout out. Shout out to Luis, who always has a question or two. So shout out to those two who always send in questions. So thank you all very much for that. In the meantime, this podcast is free and available across all platforms, including Stitcher, Spotify, Odyssey, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, etc., yada, yada, yada. You can follow me online. I said that already. I swear I've done this before. I've only done this 893 other times. Yes, this is episode number 894. And as I'm recording this, I got another message. So, yay! Questions. Gotta love it. Thank you all so much for your continued support. It is so greatly appreciated. I am out of here. Next episode will be live from Acrisure Arena. For Locked On Anaheim Ducks, I'm Jason JD Hernandez saying have a great rest of the day, afternoon, evening, whenever you watch or listen to this. Please remember to be safe out there, be kind to one another, and Ducks fly together.